A few years ago, I was in the process of getting a divorce. My wife had left me for another guy, and I was at a pretty low point. My closest friends were her brothers-in-law, and while they stuck by me, and are still like brothers to this day, it felt weird to me at the time to be hanging out with my soon-to-be ex's family. So, I was spending a lot of time alone. I couldn't handle staying at the house all the time by myself, and pretty much any excuse to get out was something I jumped on. Which is how I ended up at a concert at a local bar alone, and where this story really begins. I was actually pretty excited to see this band. They're from our area, but have managed to become pretty big nationally, and they're very popular around here. I showed up early so I could get a seat at the bar and chill rather than have to stand in front of the stage and not have room to move. I ended up waiting for the doors to open with a relatively small group of people, maybe 15 or 20 of us. One of the others waiting at the door, it was her. She had the look of someone who'd been on some very, very heavy drugs for years. I could tell that she was probably around my age, but she looked at least 20 years older than she actually was. I could also tell that she was currently on something and had also been drinking pretty heavily before coming to the bar. She was staggering and slurring her words, but just managed to keep it together enough that I didn't kick her out. She was wearing what I assume she thought was concert attire, but she honestly just looked like a prostitute. A tube top with a small two-way jacket over it and an extremely short skirt. This was in February and it was snowing and about 20 degrees. I'm assuming that she thought that she was hot, but frankly, she was pretty disgusting. She was standing with a group of 4 or 5 other people, but kept looking my direction and making me really uncomfortable when I caught her looking at me. Anyway, they finally let us in, and I found a spot at the bar where I thought I'd be able to stage pretty well, settled in and ordered a beer. This woman and her group wandered around for a bit until it started getting crowded, and then ended up standing very near me. She was close enough for me to smell her stale cigarettes, BO, and alcohol. Awesome. Once the warm-up band started playing, I managed to enjoy myself. A couple at the bar next to me ended up being pretty cool, and I spent some time talking to them between bands. I had planned on only having a couple of beers since I was alone and had to drive home. In the snow, mind you. But the guy ended up buying a bucket of beers without asking me and wanted to split it. He'd been cool, so I was like, what the hell. I'll call a cab if I have to. By the time the main band started, I was on my 6th and I was feeling pretty good. It was at this point that the crack whore, she started hitting on me. I told her that I wasn't interested and she moved back to her group for a couple of songs. It wasn't long before she was back though, and this time she started grinding all over me and ended up falling into my lap. I tried to help her off me as politely as I could while hiding my disgust. I'm pretty laid back and don't like to be rude to people, so I was still trying to be nice at this point. Unfortunately, instead of taking the hint, she turned and wrapped her arms around my neck, and I was forced to stand up and practically dump her off me. If she hadn't had a good grip on me, I have no doubt that she'd have been on the floor. I forcibly peeled her off me, and once again told her that I wasn't interested, and she sulked back to her friends. The next person who came over was one of the girl's male friends.
Yo, what's wrong with you, man? That girl really likes you. Are you gay or something?
Again, trying to be as polite as possible, I replied. No, I'm not gay. I'm just not interested, okay? Sorry. The two that I'd befriended luckily had my back and told this dude to just fuck off. The girl even told him that I was out of that crack whore's league, definitely made me feel pretty good about myself. He went back to their group and they moved away, and I went back to enjoying the concert and had a really great time. After the show, the couple, they told me that they actually knew the band and asked if I wanted to go and meet them. And, of course, I did. Plus, I needed some time to sober up before going home anyway. So, they led me out the back where the band's tour buses were. I say tour buses, but they were mostly old RVs. Anyway, I got to meet the bands and hung out with them for a bit, which was really awesome. I was offered more beer even, and other things of the greenery variety, if you get my drift, which I declined, knowing that I needed to go home at some point. It was then that I noticed Crackhore and her group. They were still around, and they were all staring daggers at me. 3 girls and 2 guys. Once I saw this, I sobered up even faster and finally decided that it was probably time for me to leave since the crowd was getting pretty thin, and I definitely did not want to be there anymore. I walked pretty quickly to my car, which was in a fairly empty area of the parking lot, and I could hear the group behind me being belligerent. I jumped in and headed out, and unfortunately, they followed. I could see them get in their car and pull out behind me. It's still snowing, and I know that I probably still shouldn't be driving, even on clear roads, so I'm trying to stay calm and not do anything to get pulled over. But a car full of angry drunken druggies on your bumper tends to make it a bit hard to stick to the speed limit. When I hit the highway, and they were still right on my butt, I decided screw it. I'd rather end up in a DUI than dead, so I started trying to lose them. The roads were slick, but I was in an AWD SUV, and they were in an old beater with presumably crappy tires. In the first sharp turn I took, I skidded a little in the snow but held it on the road. They were not so lucky. I watched them slide off the side of the road and into the ditch and chuckled to myself victoriously. I'm not heartless, though, even when somebody deserves it. I wasn't going to leave 5 people, possibly injured in a ditch, to freeze to death. Plus, I was pretty sure that they were going to go to jail, so I called 911 and told them about the incident. I didn't stop or mention that they were chasing me, though. I did not want to talk to the cops or go back and have to see them again. And I was also pretty sure that while I felt completely sober at this point, I probably still wouldn't pass a breathalyzer myself. So I just made the call and went home. I'm not sure what ended up happening with them, but I never saw them again, despite going to plenty of concerts in the same area since. What really troubles me, though, is that they were so determined to get to me. So, this is a story that happened to my mum's friend in Korea, about 10 years ago. And every time I hear this story, I still get the chills. My mum's friend lived in an apartment complex in Seoul. She was a stay-at-home mother with a young daughter, and her husband worked during the days. One day, she was coming home from running errands with her daughter and got onto the elevator in her building. When she got on, she noticed that there was a man wearing a cap and a yellow raincoat, and he kept his head low so that she couldn't really see his face. She immediately felt really uneasy, and she made her daughter stand to her side, furthest away from the man. What made her feel even more uncomfortable, though, was that when she pressed the button for her floor, there was no other lit number. And on top of that, she noticed that he was carrying something wrapped inside newspaper close to his side. Things started to click in my mum's friend's head, and she started to panic and decided to take out her cell phone and pretend that she was calling home to her husband, who was obviously really not at home and at work. She started saying things like, "Oh, I'm on the elevator and about to get off. Can you get the door for me?" and making it seem like her husband was waiting at home. When the elevator did reach her floor, I think she lived on like the 12th floor or something, she quickly got off and grabbed her daughter and started to walk as fast as she could to her apartment. She noticed that the man also got off on her floor and was following her slowly down the hallway. When my mum's friend got to her door, she started to bang on it and shout, "Hey husband, dear, I'm home, please open the door," and kind of pretended like he was coming to answer the door. Upon seeing this, the man in the yellow raincoat started to walk away back towards the elevator. When he seemed to be far away enough, my mum's friend quickly picked up her daughter and slid open her door's passcode thingy. This is usually how people get into their homes in Korea, and started to frantically punch in her keycode. But the problem was, the buttons would make sounds, so the man knew that no one was going to answer the door for her, and he turned around and started to run back towards her. My mum's friend, at this point, was practically screaming, and when she finally got her door open, the first thing she did was throw her daughter in through the door. When she got in herself, she saw that the man was pretty much inches from the door, but she managed to shut it and lock it before he could wedge his hand or weapon into the door. Afterwards, looking through the door's peephole, she saw that the man was walking away towards the elevator. Several months later, my mum's friend was watching the news, and there was a coverage on the capture of a serial killer named Yu Yong-chul, who used to kill a lot of prostitutes. She told my mum that she could never forget the dread she felt when she saw the too familiar yellow raincoat and hat that he was wearing when he was apprehended. Okay, so I'm 18, male, 6 foot even, 180 pounds, and I generally don't get scared easy. But lately, I've noticed some strange things happening in the house I live in. Here's a little backstory. I've lived here for 10 months with my grandparents. I've heard many creepy and indescribable noises and never really thought anything of it. That is, until recently. The house isn't too old, but based on some of the spots in the house, I don't think it's necessarily new either. I sleep upstairs, and my grandparents' room is down the hall a ways, and I have my own bathroom, and so do they. I'll get into why I mention that in a bit, but I just started working at a restaurant bussing tables, and I don't get off until late. So last night, I got off at about 10 PM, and I decided to hang out with a friend of mine after work. I didn't get home until 12, and my grandparents hit the hay around 10 every night because they have to get up early in the mornings. I was tired, so I got home and just went to my room and shut my door. I have a closet next to my bed that has a door, and I vividly remember looking at it to make sure that it was shut and the light was off. I've heard some creepy noises coming out of that closet before, and I always keep an eye on it just in case. But for some reason, when I was looking at it, I had this sudden feeling wash over my body. It was the weirdest urge. The urge to cry. I don't know why, and I just stopped looking at it and got into bed. But something just didn't feel right. It was pitch black in my room as I was trying to fall asleep. I checked my watch, and it was a little after 1 AM. I lied my head down to try to finally fall asleep, but not even a minute later, I heard a series of soft footsteps right outside my door. Obviously, I was pretty terrified at this point. Again, there's no reason my grandparents would be up, and I would have heard them open their door in the dead silence of the night. Their bathroom is in their room, so they wouldn't have had a reason to leave, even if they did have to use the bathroom. As I lay there, literally shaking, eyes closed, just trying to fall asleep, I shit you not, in my closet, I heard something fall and hit the floor. Needless to say, my heart almost stopped in that moment. At this point, I just wanted to ignore everything, fall asleep and be done with it. But it was about another hour before I finally fell asleep. And here's the next creepiest part. I wake up all alone in the house. My grandparents are in meetings and such. I look over at my closet and my heart sank. It's just barely opened. Just enough for something to look at me sleep or something. To top it off, the light was also turned on in the closet. Now that it's the morning and there's some daylight, I was feeling a bit more confident. I approached my closet and opened it, and there, just laying on the floor, are two of my shirts with the hangers still on them. And they were not even under where I hang my shirts, but across the closet, like they were moved there or thrown there or something. I just hung them back up and closed the light and shut the damn door. And now, I'm just waiting to see what happens. Again, this is not the first time that I've heard anything creepy happen in the closet. This is just the most that's ever happened at once. And it was pretty damn noticeable this time. I've always believed in something, and I've had one other experience in a different house when I was a junior in high school. The feeling I had back then was the same feeling that I experienced last night. I'm going to do a series of tests and recordings over the next couple of months until I can prove myself wrong or right on whether something is here with me. Hopefully, I'm wrong. So, I'm not really sure how to begin this, and I'll try to be as brief and concise as possible. It was summer of 2004, and my family was supposed to vacation in Maine. My father was stuck in meetings, so he was going to come up from Manhattan a few days after us. My mum wanted to drive up. It was super annoying to me at the time, but we didn't have a choice. And my brother, sister and I loaded into the car and started the drive. I was about 14 at the time. The drive was uneventful, but there were various delays, and we ended up getting in a lot later than originally planned. Because of this, the owners of the house that we were renting had turned in for the night, and we weren't able to get a hold of them to get the keys. I know it sounds like horrible planning, but apparently they were pretty strict about the time frame to pick up the keys. My mum, unfazed, decided that she wanted lobster, so we went to one of our favourite spots. She called my dad to see if he could make us reservations at a hotel while we ate. We were enjoying the lobster while a guy came up and started chatting with my mum. I figured it was just a friendly local, making conversation. During this time, my dad calls my mum, and my mum excuses herself to speak to him. Apparently, all hotels were booked for the night. Go figure. Height of vacation season. The plan was for us to drive to the nearest town and just find somewhere to stay, until we could pick up the keys for our vacation home. Apparently, the local had been listening into my mum's conversation and came back over once she got off the phone. I want to say that there was nothing outwardly off about him. He was preppy, clean-cut, unassuming, and fit in with the clientele. He told my mum that he had a big home with a big guest house that we were more than welcome to stay at, and his wife wouldn't mind. Immediately, my reaction was, F that. No way in the world I was staying in a random dude's house in creepy Maine in the dark. No offense to anyone from Maine, but the streets get creepy there. My mum, doing her due diligence, determined that this guy was legit. He said that he was in finance. My mum was an investment banker, and they chatted enough for my mum to determine that he wasn't totally full of it. I called my dad hysterical. He said I was overreacting and that I needed to get out of the city more and accept that sometimes people are just nice. So my brother, sister and I got into our car and followed him back to his house. The guest house was really nice, I must admit. Fully furnished even. But the beds were oddly placed. The guest house had 2 bedrooms, and instead of the beds being located in the middle, centered, imagine a symmetrical room layout, they were right under the window in each room. It just seemed out of place. Anyway, fast forward. We were all getting ready to go to bed, and my mum hears a knock on the door, and it's the guy. He said that he just wanted to check in to make sure that we got settled. It was pretty cool and a nice thing to do. But about 30 minutes later, he comes back to check in again. At this point, my mum was like, "Thanks, we're good. We'll stop by the house in the morning to say thank you, etc." Fast forward another 30 to 45 minutes and I can't sleep. I'm terrified. And then we hear this rustling, which is odd because the guest house was nowhere around trees or close proximity to bushes that might cause such a noise. At this point, I see my mum wide awake and look up at the window, like motioning towards the window with her eyes. Let me add that none of the windows had curtains. The guy said it was because his wife was in the process of redecorating. But when I looked up, there was a male figure just standing there. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I don't know how long he was there for, but when he walked away, my mum waited a bit and then told us to get our stuff together. She wasn't messing around either. We had my dad on the phone at this point, and he was pretty much flipping out at my mum about something, but I didn't hear what. My mum said that she was going to put stuff in the car and to follow her out. This was around 2 a.m, mind you. When we got into the car, we pulled around to the front of the main house, so my mum could return the key and say thanks and just get the hell out of there. However, when we got to the front, all of the lights were off. Not just all lights, but it looked like no one had been home. The porch light, table lamp in the front windows, everything was black. Also, the 2 cars were gone. The local's car, and what we presumed to be his wife's car. After seeing this, my mum, at this point pretty unsettled, said that we were leaving, and we proceeded to drive to the gate. But the gate at the end of the driveway had been deadbolted, padlocked shut from the inside. It wasn't a super strong gate, so my dad said rev it. We were in a big SUV, and just get the hell out of there. We drove back to New York City, not speaking the entire time. We never returned back to Maine, and my parents refused to speak about it. I asked a family member one night about it when he was drunk, and all he said was, "What? They didn't tell you?" "Yeah, the actual owners of that house, they were on vacation." I'm assuming that my mum or dad followed up with the local authorities and figured that out, but just never told me. I don't know who that man was or what was planned that evening. I was curious for some time as to whether there were any serial killers or murderers who were in the area at that time, or just traveling through or something. But to this day, I've never found anything. In 2006, I was a college student at ASU. I lived in an off-campus apartment on the ground floor and It was a block off of a major street here in Phoenix called Baseline. These details are important. In the summer of 2006, Phoenix, Arizona was plagued by two serial killers. One was the Phoenix shooter, who ended up being a team of two guys randomly shooting people, and the other was the Baseline killer, a rapist and murderer. Having two serial killers put the entire city on edge, and everyone was talking about it. I even saw articles in Time or Newsweek about the situation. So, the fall 2006 semester had just started. Now, you may have heard of this, but Phoenix is hot in August. It would get stuffy in my apartment too, and so I'd leave the window cracked a little because the morning air is nice. The blinds provided visual cover. One morning, a strange sound woke me up. It was the crack of dawn, around 4:45 a.m., and the sun was just barely coming up. It was the sound of someone lightly tapping on the window, and it seemed intentional. In my tired state, I figured it could have been a bird or some branches or something trivial. After about 90 seconds of nothing, the tapping returned though, and it was absolutely purposeful. I was positive that it was a human producing this noise. I thought it was my boyfriend, who thought it was cute to try and scare me sometimes, and I decided I'd be a bit of a brat and make him wait. But I was also getting really angry. I thought to myself, how dare he pull a prank when I'm trying to sleep? This is just like him. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind about disturbing my sleep like this. At a certain point, I got up to get a glass of water, still being in the mindset of wanting to annoy my stupid boyfriend who thought that this would be funny. But I saw movement through the slit in the blinds, and I marched over and yanked the blind so that I could see. And it was definitely not my boyfriend. I said very loudly, "What the fuck?" And he sort of seemed taken back by my anger, but only slightly. The man I saw will be with me forever, or more specifically, his eyes and the feeling they gave me were insanely creepy. Honestly, words can't do justice to how terrifying his eyes were. They looked like black orbs with no white in them. Absolutely predatory. When I see pictures of Ted Bundy or Charles Manson, that's exactly what he looked like. Even if you saw a picture of how they looked, it's different when you experience it in person. It totally floored me. Something about this man was just profoundly wrong. He was crouched down, like an umpire. He had on dark pants, a dark purple shirt, and dark Nike hat. He had dark skin, and I thought he might have been Hispanic. But later, I found out that he was a light-skinned black guy. You'll find out how I learned this soon. Anyways, after I yelled, "What the fuck" at him, he whispers to me, "Can I talk to you?" If you want to know how insanely creepy that is to hear, just whisper that sentence out loud to yourself right now. It still sends chills down my spine when I think about how that sounded. His hands suddenly moved towards his waist. I later learned that he would blitz attack his victims, and he probably had a gun. All that separated us was a mesh screen. Now, this was about a 3-second interaction at this point, and for some reason, I thought of Ted Bundy and how he'd pretend to be crippled to target his victims. I thought of my mum telling me to not be nice to strangers, don't be afraid to be a bitch. My thinking wasn't as calculated as all that, but it was more the nano-processing of how to deal with the situation. So, when he whispered that, I started yelling at him to get the hell out of here. I shut the window angrily and locked it. I can't overemphasize how incredibly irritated I was that this person had the audacity to disturb my precious sleep. I laid back down and wondered if I'd been too mean. What if he did actually need help? But that didn't really make sense. Why would he be, tapping and whispering if he was truly in trouble? I decided that he was a creep after all, and I was just too annoyed to get back to sleep, but I sort of laid back down. I told my roommate about an hour later, and she sort of jokingly asked if it couldn't have been the baseline killer. When she said that, though, my heart sank. His face did actually look exactly like it did in the police sketches that were on billboards everywhere. The only problem is that those billboards showed him with dreads, and the man at the window had no dreads. Apparently, he was some sort of disguise artist who'd wear wigs. Updating the police sketch would have been a nice move, but they didn't. I called the Phoenix police, and the detective I talked to agreed that it sounded like him. The suspect would say something to throw off his target, and then he'd blitz attack them. The detective said that my angry response probably made me seem like too much of a hassle, and maybe he moved on. The only problem was that I thought that the guy looked Hispanic, and the detective said many witnesses described him as black. I thought they might want to come out and try for samples or surveillance videos or something, but I didn't hear back from the detective. Obviously, my parents freaked out, got us knives, pepper spray, and put up signs. We learned another tenant had complained that same morning too. I never learned the details, but this idiot was apparently going around the damn complex trying to find a target. To make matters worse, the stupid apartment wouldn't let us out of our lease, so we moved to a second-floor apartment right above our old unit. Anyways, on September 4th of 2006, they arrested Mark Godot. I think the detective didn't call me because they were days away from arresting him. When I saw his mugshot, though, I was sick, but also kind of relieved. He was absolutely the guy outside of my window. To me, he looked like he could have been Hispanic. You can judge for yourself if you Google it. He's on death row in Arizona now. His wife tried to mount some campaign to show that the police were framing him for something. On a personal level, it certainly would make for an interesting coincidence if this poor innocent man who they framed was also whispering like a creep and tapping at my window. The other interesting thing about this story is that I had a really bad eating disorder at the time, and about 8 months after this happened, I got in a solid recovery. I never would have experienced how wonderful life could be if the slightest thing would have changed that morning in 2006. I can't think of something more scary than a serial killer tapping on your window. And that actually happened to me. In my town, there's a stretch of road down a valley along a river. It's a gorgeous drive, probably only 15 miles, until it dead ends at a nature centre where there are lots of trails to hike, and people spend a whole weekend out there camping, fishing and hunting. The cell service cuts off about halfway there, but I drive that road all the time. It's a good drive to take while my infant naps in the car, and my toddler loves to look for all sorts of wildlife along the way. There are a few houses along the way, mostly tucked up in the side of the mountain, hidden in the trees, but we usually pass a few people along the road out for a jog or walking the dog. One morning, the baby falls asleep in the car, so we take a drive to the nature centre and back, looking for a moose or an eagle or something. It's about 6 degrees. The roads are kind of icy, but they're not too bad. We get to the dead end and turn around and head back towards town, when, about a mile down the road, I see 2 people walking along the shoulder. It's not unusual. It is a pretty morning too, but as I get closer, one of them jumps out in the middle of the road, frantically waving me down. I slam on my brakes, but with her in the middle of the road and it being a bit slick out, I damn near slide into her with my car. I finally get stopped. The way she flagged me down, I thought one of them maybe had gotten hurt or something, and with no cell service where we were, maybe they needed help. I crack my window and the two of them run up to my car. The guy hung back, behind my car, in my blind spot, which, I must admit, immediately made me a bit nervous. I couldn't get a good look at him, but it was red flag number 1. But the lady came up to the cracked window and said that their car had broken down and they needed a ride into town. But I hadn't passed a car parked along the road, so that was red flag number 2. I explained that I had my kids in the car, so I obviously had no room, and nor was I comfortable having strangers in my car with my kids there, which just made her mad. I offered to call a cab, or an Uber in fact, but she refused those, and then started trying to open my car door, which thankfully was still locked. The guy behind my car started yelling and cursing at me, so I just said sorry again and just drove off. As soon as I drove far enough to get a cell signal, I called the non-emergency police line to let them know about the stranded hitchhikers. It turns out the police were looking for them because one of the homeowners along that road had found them sleeping in his car. And apparently, they were trying to get back into town to disappear before the cops found them. But the cops did find them. I had kind of brushed it off. That is, until a week later watching the evening news. They were a featured story because they were a husband and wife, and he murdered her and then tried to frame it as if she had just tripped and fallen down the stairs. Knowing that piece of information now, there's no doubt in my mind that if I had let them into my car, or they had successfully forced their way in, he definitely would have killed me too, just for my car. My mum, she owns her own business and she works extremely hard. This means that she spends many late nights sitting on the living room floor with her work sprawled out all around her. One night, back in 2003, she had a typical routine going, sorting through paperwork and making piles. It was late, close to midnight on a Wednesday, so when the phone rang, she was a bit surprised. My dad worked third shift at a factory, so she assumed that it was him. When she answered the phone, there was no reply. Just lots of heavy breathing. Admittedly creeped out, she hung up and called my dad immediately. He told her that he hadn't called, and she just left it at that. Keep in mind, this was almost 15 years ago, and we lived in a small town with practically no crime. We never locked our doors even, and were never scared of dangerous people at all. But the phone calls, they just kept coming. Every night, multiple times at night. And the person on the other end, they actually started talking. He started by saying, "Hello, Diane. You're so beautiful. I'd love to meet you," and things quickly escalated into him going into graphic detail of how he wanted to rape and strangle her. Of course, she stopped answering the phone, and she informed the police too. But nothing was ever done, and the phone would just continue to ring. My parents weren't in the situation where my dad could stay home from work, and my mum truly believed that the calls were just empty threats, so things continued on. Until one night, he got brave. My mum was sitting on the floor in front of our huge mirrored cabinet with all her work around her when the phone rang. She ignored it, as usual. She was concentrating hard on a piece of paper in front of her, when a glimmer of light in the mirror caught her eye. She looked up to see a pair of glasses peering at her in the reflection. She spun around to face the front door, which her back had been turned to, and a man was standing there, staring at her. She said that they both just stared at each other for what felt like forever, until she saw the doorknob turn. She started screaming, and the man quickly just ran away. In light of the phone calls, my parents had started locking all the doors, which was totally a foreign concept to our household. My older brother, who was about 17 at the time, and was aware of the phone calls, came running down the stairs with a baseball bat. But the man was long gone at this point. When the police came, they scoured our property, and came across close to 200 cigarette butts right underneath our living room windows, hidden behind bushes. Apparently, he had been watching her for weeks. The police also happened to find a bike trail coming from the windows and going down the sidewalk. They took the cigarette butts and did some DNA testing on them, and they were able to match them to a convicted rapist who lived right down the street from us. Robert Ham was arrested while riding his bike. He went to prison for menacing and attempting to commit a crime. He had many priors, so we assumed that he would be locked away for quite some time. The reason I'm telling this story is because he was released from prison earlier this year. More than a few years ago, I was working at a burlesque entertainer in a gentleman's club, and was idly sitting at the end of the bar one night when a couple came in. It wasn't unusual. I had no contact with them and thought nothing of them being there. Until later. A few days after that night, the doorman handed me a piece of paper that had 2 names and phone numbers written on it. Laura and Richard. I was supposed to call one of them, so I called Laura, who told me that they'd been the couple who'd been at the bar the other night, and they'd noticed me, and thought that I'd be perfect for a part in a movie that Richard was producing. They also asked if I'd be up for a meeting, and of course I would. Who wouldn't? I was told that Richard would pick me up the next night at 7, and to wear something wild. 7 o'clock came the next evening, and I was ready in a white lace dress with ostrich feather trim when Richard showed up outside my building. So I went down, introduced myself, and got in the car. We agreed to go to a local bar I knew well for the meeting, but first we had to go back to his place so that he could pick up some contracts he'd forgotten. So off we went. He went into the house and came back out with a few manila envelopes and an open bottle of beer, a brand that I didn't drink. Plus, it's against the law to drink alcohol in a vehicle here, so I stuck the beer into the window well of his Jeep and we went to the bar. At the bar, he showed me what were supposedly scripts from this movie he was producing, and some contracts. And to be honest, it looked pretty legit. Richard was really nice too, and I was interested. I'd made some plans to go out later with my soon-to-be boyfriend, so I excused myself to go call him on the bar's payphone, and took my Corona that I'd ordered at the bar with me to the bank of the phones. As a dancer, I'd been taught by the other, older girls to never let your drink out of your sight. My boyfriend wanted to get going to the other club, so I went back to the table where Richard was and told him that I had to go. He didn't like that, and tried a few different things to get me to go to the movie set with him, saying that I could meet Mickey Rourke and check out the set. But all I really wanted to do was meet my boyfriend. So I declined, took Richard's card, and just left. After that, I never heard from Richard again. But a couple of months later, the police came around to the bar I was working at. They had 2 big books of mugshots and a stack of Polaroids with them, and they wanted to talk to all of us about a predator couple who had been setting up meetings with dancers by saying that they were in the film industry, and then drugging and raping them. They showed me the 2 mugshot books and asked if I saw anyone I recognized in the pictures, and I immediately identified Richard and Laura. They then showed me the Polaroids, which were trophy pictures of the couple in the act of attacking the poor drug girls, and asked if I knew any of the victims and where we might find them, in order for them to talk to the girls. I only knew a couple of the women in the photographs, but there were a lot that this had happened to, apparently. Richard and Laura, they were prosecuted eventually. He went to jail, but apparently she didn't, because she was from a wealthy family, and she also turned witness on him, allegedly. About 12 years after Richard was convicted, I saw in the newspaper that he was up for the possibility of parole. So I wrote a letter to the parole board telling this story and urging them not to let him back out, because he's a dangerous offender who should have to stay in prison for the entirety of his sentence. If I had drank that open beer that he had handed to me in his Jeep on the way to that meeting, I wouldn't have made it, and would probably have ended up in the same stack of that Polaroids. Girls and guys, always keep your eye on your drinks. Have fun, but be careful out there, okay? This is an encounter from about 10 years ago, and it took place in Milwaukee Airport. I was 19, recently independent, discovering my identity. In doing so, I had found and developed a relationship on MySpace with a girl from North Carolina, and I was infatuated. We talked online, video chatted, texted, and called each other constantly for 6 months, until we finally figured out how to meet in person. She came to visit, and it was perfect. I was totally obsessed, and that was that. We're still together to this day, too. Then it came time for her to fly back to North Carolina. And here is where things started to go wrong. She had a flight to catch, and I was dragging my feet, trying to absorb every last moment and commit it to memory, as I didn't know how long it would be until I got to see her again. We boarded a city bus, bags in tow, and headed to the airport. The bus trip took longer than we anticipated, and when we reached the airport, it was 5 minutes until boarding. We ran to the luggage check-in, only to be told that, apparently, she had missed her flight. My lollygagging had made her miss her flight. Shit. A small part of me was secretly happy, but I had no idea what to do now. I didn't have a car or any money to get her another flight. However, the woman at the luggage counter found her another seat on a later flight. 8 hours later. Again, I had no car, and I was planning on riding the bus back home. We really couldn't leave the airport easily, so we looked for a spot to post up for a few hours. No problem. She had her laptop and some blankets and pillows meant to use in the flight. We could hang out for a little while longer, and I was actually looking forward to the additional time together. So, we set off in search of somewhere to sit down and stretch out for a few hours. Meanwhile, I called my roommate at the time and asked if she could come down and bring some food, and my wallet that I had left at home. We combed the airport and found an empty family room, complete with chairs, love seat, and plenty of wall outlets. And even better, it had a door. There was also a large bathroom, but the door was closed. The airport was pretty desolate at this point, and there was no waiting to use the room, so we set our stuff down, plugged in our computers, got out some pillows and snuggled down to watch a movie while we waited. My roommate eventually showed up, and we directed her to the room, over the phone. She brought snacks and drinks and decided to wait with us and give me a ride home after. It was really cool of her, and only like 6 more hours to go. The 3 of us sat in the secluded room, watching movies, my roommate mostly on the phone with her girlfriend. Eventually, sometime during our second movie, I think it was, we were startled by the sound of the door opening. Only, it wasn't the door we came through, which had been closed the entire time. It was the bathroom door. A man walked through the door and sat down across from us. He had been in that bathroom the entire time that we were in there. Stupidly, none of us had bothered to check the bathroom. The light was on, but there hadn't been any sound coming from it. The man sitting across from us was average height, a little bit overweight, dark hair, olive skin. His hair was wet, and he was holding a towel, running it over his head and scrubbing at his hair, the way you do when you've just finished a shower. He didn't have any shoes on. He was barefoot. He had no luggage with him. He was wearing khaki cargo shorts, a white undershirt, and an unbuttoned Hawaiian print shirt over the top. At this point, he was just sitting across from us, sitting casually as if he hadn't been in the bathroom for more than 2 hours, silently. Eventually, he broke the tension in the room by asking us where we were flying to. We answered as casually as possible, without giving away any information about ourselves. We asked him where he was going, and he said,
Wherever the wind takes me.
Okay, we were vague, but that was just straight up avoidance. I tried asking where he was from next.
Nowhere. I have no home country.
I was confused at this point, and I tried to ask him where he'd come from. Was he a local to this city?
No. I'm from nowhere. I just go wherever.
Okay, so now I'm thinking maybe he is homeless and was just using the bathroom to clean up. No big deal if that's the case. He'll wander off eventually, right? My roommate got up to find a better cell reception and walked out the door we came in through, intentionally leaving it wide open. I could see a few people walking around now, and I immediately felt better. The door is open and he can walk out whenever. We can walk out whenever. People can see us. Everything is going to be okay. My roommate wanders back in and sits down, and we hunker down for another movie. By now, the man is dozing off in the armchair he sat in, and we did our best to just ignore him, making sure the door was left open and people could see us. Sometime during the millionth movie that we were watching, we made a crucial mistake. We got bored and sleepy, and unfortunately, we all dozed off. Stupid, incredibly stupid, I know, but it's just one of those things. You don't realize you've done it until you're waking up. But what we woke up to is forever ingrained in my memory. There was hard banging on the door, the shouting of police officers, something about opening the door and walking out with our hands up. My eyes dart to the door. Why can't they open it? There isn't a lock. But then I see it. At the bottom, there are maybe 3 or 4 industrial box cutters shoved underneath, wedged in to keep the door from opening. My mind is reeling at this point. What the fuck is going on? Did he lock himself in here with us? How could I have fallen asleep? How could we all have fallen asleep? The man then starts talking.
Okay, no problem. I'll open the door. Hang on, just a minute.
He walks over to the door and pulls the box cutters from under the door. sliding their blades back into their hulls and places them in the pockets of his cargo shorts. He opens the door, and the police immediately handcuff him and escort him away. All the while he's explaining that he just wanted privacy and didn't mean any harm. Sure, dude. You need box cutters shoved under the door for privacy while you're in a secluded room with 3 19-year-old girls? Right. After everything settled, the police asked us if we were okay, and explained to us that apparently they'd been looking for this guy. He allegedly had a habit of coming to that airport and hiding out, harassing people and just being a general nuisance. We assured the police that we were okay, unharmed, and just rattled by the whole situation. In the end, we never did find out where he was from, or where he was going, or even who he was. So yesterday, I was at my sister's house with my mum watching my son and nephews play in the yard. One of my nephews, Harrison, was picking bark off of a tree when I remembered an odd encounter I had as a kid. I said "so weird" out loud, thinking about the encounter. My mum inquired what I was talking about, so I told her. When I was a kid, I was hanging out at the pinecone forest, which was what the neighborhood kids called a small patch of trees on the side of the road. I was picking bark off of one of the trees to pass some time waiting for my friend Frankie to finish his homework and come out to play. Out of nowhere, it seemed, a guy came up to me. I could smell him before I could see him. He smelled like stale cigarette smoke, and I was kind of scared when I looked at him. He wasn't very old, but he had a really lazy eye that was cloudy, and his teeth and fingernails, they were all stained yellow. My mum taught me to be nice to people, even if they don't look like me, so I faked a smile and just said hello.
What are you doing?
He asked me. The smell of his breath was the worst. I'm picking the bark off this tree.
You shouldn't do that. It's like picking off the tree's skin. How would you feel if someone picked off your skin?
He said while slightly pinching my arm with his sharp yellow nails. I don't know, I replied and took my arm back. Just then, Frankie's mum called for me out the door and told me to come and wait inside. I didn't think anything of the whole thing at the time. When I told my mum about it, she had this look of, I don't know, guilt maybe. She said that it's probably time I know the whole story, and she thought I forgot about the whole encounter, so she never brought it up to me. First, you should know that the neighborhood I grew up in was a small, tight-knit community. Everyone knew everyone, and there was no reason for an outsider to come unless they knew someone there. Anyway, here's what happened with this guy. Frankie's mum, Sonia, noticed a white van with no windows parked on the side of the road. How cliché, right? She didn't recognize it, but figured maybe it was a visitor for a neighbor. Sonia said, or rather told the police, that the van had been there all morning and afternoon. She was kind of just keeping an eye on it. She said that she just had a bad feeling. Her house had a huge window in the front facing the pinecone forest, and the van was parked next to it. She saw me waiting for Frankie and kept a constant eye on the van while holding the phone just in case. She saw the man exit the back of the van and walk up to me. As soon as she saw him grab my arm and pinch me, she called the cops. And that was when she called me into her house. The cops stopped the guy just outside of my neighborhood, and in the back of his van were binoculars, a Polaroid camera, and pictures of me taped all over the walls and ceiling. Me at school, at my grandparents' house, at the bank with my mum, just me everywhere I went. But that's not all. He had a key to a storage unit on him, and the cops decided to check it out, considering how creepy things were. Inside the unit, they found a cabinet full of knives. A lot of knives. Paring knives, a butcher's cleaver, a thin fillet knife, a melon baller, and just various knives of all shapes and sizes. There were also a few anatomy books, equipment, duct tape, and 10 empty 5-gallon buckets. In the middle of the unit was an old bed that was used to restrain mental patients, so it had wrists and ankle straps. And worst of all, the entire inside of the unit was covered in plastic wrap. The last I heard, my mum said that he was in a high-security mental institution for the criminally insane, and I kinda want to keep it that way.